Acha, kindly share your thoughts about having ecological consciousness and its presence and relevance in various religious traditions in our country.
First of all, thank you so much, Shinu, for having me in this August prestigious series of interviews, which you do in memory of lamented Paulus Mar Gregorius, Metropolitan. With regard to your question on ecological consciousness, see the word ecological consciousness. If we look for such a term, such an understanding in primeval religions or ancient religions, it may not be there as we understand the term today. In the context of ancient religions, whether it's an Abrahamic religion or non-Abrahamic religion, they have understood really ecology. They had great respect for nature. They celebrated harmony among all species of creations. However, they have not understood the term in relation to ecological catastrophe or natural calamities or climate change and so on. But we understand the term ecological consciousness in relation to what we go through as human beings, as a community, which actually is in a serious crisis. Across the globe, we witness unprecedented climatic change, climate crisis, and so on. So, how we understand the term ecological consciousness with its intensity and with its sensitivity, it may not have been there, but we are not sure. And that is why we need to look at our primary resources of faith, whether it's liturgy or whether it's teachings of our fathers of faith and mothers of faith or scripture as such. We need to look for whether such understanding was there in their context or whether any resources can be drawn out so that we can apply it effectively in today's context. See, when we talk about Abrahamic religions, whether it's Islam or Judaism or Christianity, those religions were primarily human centric. Human beings were considered as the center of creation, they occupied the center stage. So everything was revolved around the doctrine of humanity was understood as the crown of creation. Humanity was considered as human beings created in the image of God. So humanity was the center of those religions. I think it's the same for all Abrahamic religions. There might be exceptions for sure. But when it comes to Asian religions, for example, Hinduism, we don't see so much of anthropomorphic emphasis, so much of human centeredness in Asian context. It can be considered as a misunderstanding if we generalize saying all Abrahamic religions are human centered. So it is a serious task. But however, I strongly believe that ancient religions in India and in Asia in general are much more non-anthropomorphic or not so human-centered compared to Abrahamic religions. And I think it is at this point we need to talk about not just the understanding of human beings as such, but understanding of salvation is also important to know how the very understanding of ecological consciousness is being understood and envisaged in ancient religions, Abrahamic, both Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic. For example, in Christianity, in Islam, or in Judaism, salvation is in general life after death, and it is a negation of this world. So it's mostly otherworldly, heaven centered, and non materialistic. And therefore, the very reality of the world, the very material reality of the world is considered as insignificant. what is real, even in the Greco-Roman world. For example, Plato, for him, what we see in this material three-dimensional world is just a replica of the real. So what we see in this world, the matter, the material reality is insignificant and not eternal. Eternal is immaterial or non-material, so to say. So salvation is a negation of this world. That is how people generally understand Abrahamic religions. Whereas in Hinduism, salvation is merging with the nature. And that is why after cremation or after such functions, they take the ash and they immerse it in water. So you become one with nature. So salvation or moksha is not negation of the material reality, but you become one with the nature and the matter. Having said that, um, we cannot generalize all Abrahamic religions in that fashion. Let's take Christianity, for instance. Lord's Prayer is a classical example. We don't negate this world. Rather, we say, let your world come into this world. So let heaven be established on this earth. So it is not earth heaven dichotomy, rather, heaven and earth becoming one. That is the kingdom of God. Even in the book of Revelation, we see God pitching his tent on this earth. Even after the so-called 1,000 years of millennium rule, 1,000 years of rule, what we see is the transformation of the world, not annihilation of the material reality. So, ecological consciousness in that sense is an evolving understanding. We cannot say it is there or it is not there. It might be there, it might not be there. But irrespective of whether it's evolving or non-evolving, I would say that it is there in Abrahamic religions, but we need to unearth it and we need to apply it in today's context. And in that sense, we can say ecological consciousness is more a kind of evolving understanding.
So can you give us a gist about your book also? You have also authored a book based on the ecology and its aspect in various religious traditions. Can you give us a small understanding about that book also?
Yeah, my book was on, actually, I have done two books on ecology with Madhurabhumi books. It came through Madhurabhumi books. And the first one is ideologies in general, dealing with nature, ecology, and so on. The second book was primarily on, not primarily, it is exclusively on how various religious traditions across the world understand nature. So, in that book, what I was trying to do is see how uh, nature ecology is being understood in various scriptures. So I have approached people who are experts in various religions, Hinduism, and even within Hinduism. So there is a section on Mahabharata and ecology. There is a section on Ramayana and ecology. There is a section on Vedas and ecology. There is a section on Bhagavad Gita and ecology. So I have looked at various scriptures, and same with Islam. So the understanding of Islam, in the under how nature is understood, how cosmology is understood in Quran, and then the significance of the burial places in Islamic traditions, and the importance of zakat and ecology. And then there is a section on Buddhism, Jainism, and then there is a section on Sri Narayana Guru, Vivekananda, and so on. So it is a comprehensive work, and I would say that book is a first of its kind, and that has been well received.
Thank you, Achar. What are the challenges that Christians may need to face in the coming times, and please help us understand the steps to deal with those issues.
It's a fantastic question. See, when we discuss about some of the challenges that we face as a community, as a faith community, or to be more precise, I would say there are we can look at the question on two fronts. One, is religion replaceable? That is the first question. That is the first front. See, people do believe in God. People do respect religious scriptures, and they have great respect for various religious rituals and practices. But they have a different take on the very hierarchical system of religion. So, what is more important is faith, not the system or not the hierarchical order that practice that faith. So, if you are more concerned about faith, I would say uh, faith is very seriously received by people of all generations. But people don't have the same amount of respect towards the very structure that we find in various religious traditions. So, what is more important? Faith, scripture, ritual practices, liturgy, or our hierarchical order? That is question number one. And on the second front, I would say whether human beings are replaceable. Now, what we see is human beings are not considered as inevitable. Religion is primarily an enterprise of human beings. All creation, all created order belongs to God. They communicate with God, but may not be in the same fashion as we do. So when we talk about relationship with God, I'm seriously concerned about the very future of humanity as a species. Because in all walks of life, in all areas of life, human beings are replaced. We are not so inevitable. People can live without human beings. So technology has come to our assistance. So there was a time when we need human beings for everything. But those areas were replaced by technology, by robots, by artificial intelligence, and so on. So the primary challenge, which Christianity as such, or all religions that are going to face, is how we deal with hacking of humans. If I borrow Harari's term, hacking of, we are being hacked by technology, artificial intelligence, robot, and all sorts of technology. So, if Christianity is primarily an enterprise or an entity or a community that is dealing only with human beings, how are we going to deal with those issues? Another area I would say is gender. See, our classical understanding of creation is God created human beings and he created them male and female. Now, there is a growing understanding, there is an evolving understanding of gender. So, when we talk about human beings, not just male and female, what about people who do not belong to those two groups? Who created them? How do we understand them? Are they created in the image of God? So, gender, science and technology, and hacking of humans are some of those challenges. I think as a faith community, we need to deal with. Last but not least, absolute truth, the very understanding of truth is also being challenged. So, people don't hold on to absolute claims of truth. And as a religion, as a community of faithful, we talk about certain absolute truths. But we are living in a context where any absolute claim is contested and is challenged. And how are we going to address those issues?
Acha, what are your thoughts about the future of theological education in India?
Theological education across the globe are facing serious challenges because we don't get many students. But I think Indian situation, Asian situation is still better because here the church is very strong, and here people are interested in the functions of the church, in the ministry of the church, in the witnessing of the church, and therefore people who are formally trained, people who are theologically educated, they have a specific role in the ministry of the church, especially in the various ministerial orders. So, in the Indian context, theological education is not facing much challenge, but that is not the situation in other parts of the world, especially US and Europe. Having said that, there are a few areas which we still need to address. See, in the Indian context, theology is being considered as very much contextual. So, in the whole exercise of contextualizing theological claims, absolute claims of truth, various doctrines, liturgical practices, so in the process, in the course of contextualizing it, what we face is how we deal with negotiables and non-negotiables. See, contextualization is very important. We cannot just ignore it. However, when we contextualize, how do we keep all the non-negotiables intact? For example, doctrine of salvation, doctrine of human, doctrine of sacraments, doctrine of sin. How do we distinguish negotiables and non-negotiables? And how do we keep the so-called non-negotiables intact? And what are the standards that we resort to or that we adopt to differentiate, okay, this is negotiable and this is non-negotiable? And I think that is where we face a serious challenge in the Indian context. Unless we are able to differentiate negotiables and non-negotiables, our theological education will be facing serious challenges, because here in India, theological education is very much tied up with the ministry of the church.
Acha, what are your thoughts about the role of youth and their future, especially while we think about the church in the coming times?
That's a very pertinent question, because in all churches, leaders are really struggling. They do not know, or they are not sure how to take our youth on board in the ministry of the church, or how to take them into confidence, how to address some of their challenges. I would say this question must be dealt with in relation to the question which we have discussed just now, where I said, how do we differentiate negotiables and non-negotiables? I think in the context of the ministry of the church, somehow we romanticize culture, and the leaders of the church, the seniors in the church, they were being formed in a different cultural tabula rasa, cultural context. And our youth are formed in a different culture. So there is a cultural gap. And what happens is that the leaders of the church, knowingly or unknowingly, they romanticize the culture of their times. That is okay, because that is very nostalgic. We are a product of a culture. But the problem is when we enforce the same culture in which we grew up on the youth who are living in a different cultural setting. So the very value system is very different. Their culture, their cuisine, their costumes, all different. So I'll give you one example to elaborate on this question. While I was serving in a parish overseas, our diocesan bishop he visited my parish, and he wanted to see the youth. So he said, "Why don't you call all the youths in your parish over a meal?" So I called them. There were about 13 to 14 youth. It's a small parish. So the bishop was sitting in a chair, and I was sitting next to him, and all the youth were seated on the floor. So the bishop started the whole conversation with a question. What are some of the moral questions that you face in schools and colleges? So this was the first question. The youth did not say anything. Bishop repeated the question. They were keeping quiet. So Bishop was getting a bit disturbed because the youth was not responding. So I had to intervene, and I asked them, "Hello guys, why don't you respond? What is stopping you from answering Tirumeni's question?" And one of the guys said, "Tirumeni, what do you mean by morals?" I almost fell off the chair. So Tirumeni had something in mind when he used the word moral. And people, the youth whose first language is English, for them, the dictionary meaning of the word moral, they are familiar with. But what the bishop understands by the term moral is very different from how the youth understand the same word. So, without knowing what is the meaning our youth attribute to the so-called morals that we celebrate and we preach in our church or in various church platforms, we will have serious problems because we have a fixed meaning of each word and each values. But the very content of that word, the very meaning system, the very coordinates of the meaning system are changed. So how do we communicate moral values when they understand the very word differently from us? So my point is, this is a big challenge. So the youth are more concerned about not some cultural norms or some nostalgic value system or some ancient meaning system or patriarchal norms. In my understanding, I have always found that if we talk about justice, ethics, honesty, and integrity, youth understand it better than certain cultural values. So why don't we talk about justice? Why don't we talk about equality? Why don't we talk about ethics? Why don't we talk about integrity, honesty, and so on? But what happens is, as leaders of the church, we are more obsessed with their dressing, their hairstyle. So those things are cultural. So that is where we struggle with. So how do we make them understand what we are trying to say in a way which makes sense to them? I think that's a big challenge. So it is not possible. There is no. I am not saying it is not possible, but there is no ready-made solution. So let's talk about justice. Let us talk about equality of man and woman. And I'm sure our youth will understand and respect it better. The reason why I'm saying this is the context in which we grew up, where the boundaries are clear. This is moral, this is immoral. This is acceptable, this is not acceptable. This is what our church say, and this is against the teaching of the church. So the boundaries were very clear. But in today's context, the world is so complex, so much so, the boundaries have become very fluid and blurred. So it's not easy to differentiate the boundaries, negotiables and non-negotiable. So let us use different terms which makes more sense in their context, like justice, equality, honesty, integrity, and so on, rather than to always 24/7 talking about their dress and hair and so on. I'm not saying those things are not important, but the very moment we start talking about those things, they just close their mind. So let us talk about the same thing, but from a different perspective and through a different lens.
Achha, my concluding question.
Yeah.
We know there are many biblical themes, especially in the New Testament and in the writings of Saint Paul. Can you please share a few valuable themes that we really need to understand and work upon?
See, Pauline epistles are always very problematic. Not because they are so. The problem is with how we understand Pauline letters. See, in the Bible, there are 13 Pauline epistles. We call it Pauline corpus. So they are understood together as one unit. Saint Paul says so. So when we say this is what Paul says, we take all 13 epistles into consideration. But there is a problem in it. See, when Paul wrote those epistles, Paul, I'm sure, never had the thought of all his epistles being canonized and being read together as one corpus. Because the very title of each letter says, this is written to Corinth. This is for Ephesus. This is for Colossae. And this is for Philemon. So the reader is very clear. The audience of each letter is very clear. So when Paul writes a letter to Romans, he did not want the same letter to be read elsewhere in another faith community, because that letter is to a particular church. To be more precise, the letter to the Romans is a response to various questions in the church at Rome. Those questions are of no significance elsewhere. They may be significant, even if they are significant, may not be in the same measure, may not be in the same capacity. So the problem is, without understanding the sensitivity of the context, we canonize the whole Pauline writings. But I am very sure Paul never had those intentions. And the most controversial letters are 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, there were some issues in the church. So Paul came to know about those issues to the people of people such as Chloe, through Chloe's people. So he was responding to the issues in Corinth. So without knowing the issues in the church at Corinth, we take as such and we apply it in the church in India. Paul it is always good to remember that Paul never had that intention. It is like, for example, if I write a letter to Shinu and I say, dear Shinu, so I know very clear it is whom to it is written. So it is for you, and it is to you. And the letter has some premise. Premise is how good, how friendly we are, and what all things we had discussed over the phone in person, and what all I know about your family, your situations, your personal crisis. So my letter is based on all that I know about you. It is to you. What happens if someone else read the letter which I wrote to you, and he takes that letter literally and thinking that it is written to him or her? So before he or she reads that letter, the first thing that he needs to keep in his mind is that this letter is not originally written to him or for him. If that is being forgotten, we will understand the letter. The letter which I wrote to you will be understood wrongly and erroneously by the person who happens to read that same letter. And I think this is what is happening to Paul's letter. So let us always bear in mind that Paul writes each letter, each epistle to a specific community, to a particular audience. There are different things in that letter that can be generalized, and some letters are strictly situational. It is only for that context. But unfortunately, what happens is we have confused both. We think what should be universalized, what should be generalized, and we particularize it. And what should be considered as a particular, strictly particular, is now being generalized. So what should be particularized, localized, and what should be generalized? If we confuse both, then Paul's letters will be understood differently from what Paul had originally meant. And finally, most of the terms, for example, Book of Galatians, a letter to the Romans, these letters must be understood in relation to Acts 15, where we see the tension between Peter and Paul. Most of the things can be settled, most of the controversies can be understood properly if we read those epistles through the lens of the tension between Peter and Paul. Then it will make sense.
Thank you so much, Acha, for your valuable insights.
And thank you,
That
it's my pleasure.
especially for from the interview we all received, and I believe that the references that you gave, especially Metropolitan Paulus Mark Gregorius through his books, in the Human Presence, the Cosmic Man, where
Yeah.
also the ecological dimension is also referred, and also through his other books on reason, rationality, and about the church and its future. You have rightly attributed many a times through your
Yeah, I have been
words.
greatly inspired by most of his writings. I should name at least three or four: A Light Too Bright, Enlightenment East and West, Human Presence, then The Joy of Freedom, then a small book, I think it's Cosmic Man. Um, yeah, so most of his writings are extraordinary, I would say.
Thank you so much, Acha. Thank you for your
Thank you
valuable
so much,
time.
and it's my pleasure, Achan.